Thank you, Madam President. We thank UN Famine Prevention and Response Coordinator, Rina Jalani, for her briefing. We also listened to civil society representatives who spoke at the suggestion of the United States. The topic of today's meeting, fighting hunger, is, of course, extremely important. Russia, just as the USSR before it, attaches great priority to this issue, and historically not just in connection with specific conflicts, but in the broader context of the struggle for socioeconomic human rights. The efforts of the Soviet Union in this area are remembered with gratitude in many regions of the world. I'm pleased that our Western colleagues have also begun to think about this problem, but as their statements make clear, their interest is unfortunately purely opportunistic. They have become concerned about the threat of world hunger only recently, and only insofar as they think they can attempt to exploit this topic to demonize Russia. Moreover, it is clear to us that many, and in fact, the most acute food crises are directly or indirectly provoked by the actions of the US and their allies or the consequences of their long-term policies. For example, Afghanistan, which was mentioned by our UK colleague, is struggling to climb out of the abyss of hunger and poverty for over 20 years now because of the experiments carried out by the US-led coalition to democratize this deeply traditional country in a Western fashion. Despite the fact that our colleagues, the Western members of the Security Council, did not have the courage to honestly name the root causes of food and other crises in countries such as Iraq, Libya, and Syria, we all understand full well that they are caused by illegal interventions by Western states. In the case of Syria, which was once a breadbasket for many of its neighbors, the U.S. is still occupying large swaths of this country and stealing oil, grain, and other natural resources. Whatever the case may be, dear colleagues, I propose that we begin by addressing the root causes of threats to food security, which our Western colleagues are bashfully silent about. According to UN estimates, technically, there is no acute food shortage in the world. That is, the problem isn't that there isn't enough food. There is enough food produced in the world. The problem is its uneven distribution when the West has accumulated excess stocks while developing countries have a deficit. The second reason is what economists call the price environment. In other words, when it benefits the largest producers of agro-industrial products to maintain prices high. We are talking about the so-called Big Four, the U.S. companies, Archer Daniels, Midland, Bunge, and Cargill, as well as the Dutch company Louis Dreyfus. They account for 75 to 90% of global agricultural trade. In fiscal year 2022, Cargill alone increased sales by 23% to $165 billion. Posting a record $5 billion net income. Dear colleagues, and now let us ask ourselves why, as the Western agro-industrial complex is raking in super profits, the threat of famine is hitting developing countries with growing populations the most. Why are their economies unable to cope with it? The answer is very simple. In the past, Western colonialists deliberately tailored them to extract maximum profits for their empires, and not so that they would be able to feed their populations. Monocultural agricultural specialization was forced upon them, with the result that their exports now often consist of one or two types of goods. This economic structure makes them extremely sensitive to price fluctuations in global food markets. And the current instability in those markets is due to the fact that during the COVID-19 pandemic, Western states rushed to save their own economies, not caring one bit about how their rash actions in the financial, economic, and energy, as well as other sectors, would hit more vulnerable actors in the global economy. Colleagues, 1 year ago, in response to the appeals of the UN, we put aside our doubts and agreed to a grain deal. But here, too, Western countries have managed to turn everything in their favor. One of the two parts of the deal, the Black Sea Initiative, quickly turned from a humanitarian one into a commercial one. As a result, only 3% of the exported grain went to countries in need, while the lion's share ended up in Western countries. Is this what we agreed to? The duplicity of our former Western partners was even more clear in their arrogant unwillingness to fulfill the second part of the deal, the Russia-UN memorandum on the supply of Russian food and fertilizers to world markets. And this is despite the fact that Russia's share of the global wheat market is 20%, while Ukraine's is less than 5%. This means that Russia makes a significant contribution to global food security and is a solid, responsible international supplier of agricultural products, not to mention the exceptional role played by Russian fertilizers in global food security. It would seem that given these obvious facts, Western countries need to focus on ensuring that Russian grain and fertilizers can get to countries in need without hindrance. Yet, this is not part of our Western colleagues' plans. This was unambiguously confirmed by you the day before yesterday, Madam President. So how can we talk about any kind of desire on your country's part to address international food security issues? All that drives you is the desire to punish Russia and your pipe dreams of dealing it a strategic defeat. You do not care the slightest bit about the interests of the countries of the global south, but we do. Therefore, I repeat once again that if all the problems that have been publicly raised by us, including in this chamber, regarding the implementation of the Russia-UN memorandum are eliminated, we will be ready to once again take part in the Black Sea Initiative. Dear colleagues, Western delegations today poured forth numbers detailing the humanitarian aid rendered by them to developing countries. Whether this is enough to compensate for the damage caused by centuries of cruel colonial policies of plundering natural resources and exploiting populations is not for us to judge, but rather for those states that have suffered from it. Do Western countries help a lot or a little? It's not polite to count other people's money, but it's hard not to notice that the amount of assistance provided by the U.S. and its allies to the countries of the global south cannot be compared to what the West has spent on weapons in less than 2 years for its proxy war with Russia to the last Ukrainian. According to the most conservative estimates, this amounts to 80 billion euros, while the total amount of funds allocated to Ukraine is 165 billion euros. And this is given that OCHA requested $55.2 billion from donors for all of its humanitarian operations for 2023, and only 24.8% of this amount has been funded to date. Can you imagine how much good could be done in the world if the U.S. and its allies were as willing to spend money on development assistance as they are on sponsoring wars around the world? But now I want to draw attention to something else. Despite all of their benevolent slogans, donor assistance from Western states is not selfless and always comes with political preconditions. A clear example of this is the situation with the cross-border humanitarian mechanism for Syria, where Western states are essentially openly blackmailing the Syrian people seeking a change of power. Another example is the threats we're hearing now from Josep Borrell, as well as the leadership of the UK, France, and the US to stop helping Niger. Did people suddenly stop starving there after the coup? It's obvious, in other words, that all of this humanitarian aid is being used by the West solely as a tool of control over states that are forced to resort to it. The needs of the population are not taken into account in this. Dear colleagues from developing countries, make no mistake, the habits and methods of former colonizers have not changed. Only the packaging has. For every dollar allegedly spent on aid, they will demand that you pay with your sovereignty and political independence. Many African states have already experienced this firsthand and don't want to put up with such an approach. And this is something that makes Mr. Borrell lose sleep in his garden. He suddenly decided today that selling grain at low prices, Russia somehow making its buyers dependent. I won't comment on the perverted logic of the head of EU diplomacy. I will simply say that the facts are not in its favor. Russia has never considered Africa, Asia, or Latin America as a space for extracting profits. Despite all of the obstacles put in place by the US and its allies, we have helped, are helping, and will continue to help those in need around the world free of charge. We have built and will continue building factories, schools, hospitals, and universities so that you can use your natural resources to create goods with added value instead of exporting raw materials, so that your young people can stay home rather than leaving the country en masse. We understand the importance of the uninterrupted supply of food to African countries. This is important for socioeconomic development and for maintaining political stability. That is why we're particularly focused on shipments of wheat, barley, corn, and other grains to our African friends, including through the UN World Food Program. Last year, trade in agricultural products between Russia and African countries grew by 10% and amounted to $6.7 billion, whereas in the first 6 months of this year, it has increased by another record 60%. Russia exported 11.5 million tons of grain to Africa in 2022, and just in the first 6 months of this year, we have already exported nearly 10 million. And I want to stress that this has all taken place despite the illegal unilateral sanctions imposed on our exports, which seriously impede the supply of Russian food and complicate transportation, logistics, insurance, and bank payments. Moreover, as announced at the recent Russia-Africa summit, we will be able to provide Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, the Central African Republic, and Eritrea with 25 to 50,000 tons of grains free of charge in the coming months, and we will ensure the free delivery of this as well. I also recall our readiness to donate mineral fertilizers to the poorest countries in need. Of the 262,000 tons of these fertilizers that are currently blocked in European ports, only 2 shipments have been sent so far, 20,000 tons to Malawi and 34,000 to Kenya. The rest remains in the hands of European states. And this is despite the fact that we're talking about a purely humanitarian effort to which no sanctions should apply in principle. Dear colleagues, we believe that the vast majority of countries, including African ones, which are seeing an alarming trend in the area of food security, have sufficient fertile lands. That is, there is a foundation there for building food sovereignty, and it must be strengthened not through humanitarian aid, but through the implementation of projects in the area of sustainable development as a whole, the transfer of necessary technologies, fertilizers, weather-resistant seeds. We are convinced that with the use of appropriate agricultural technologies and proper organization of agricultural production, Africa will, in the future, not only be able to feed itself and ensure its own food security, but also become an exporter of various types of food. For its part, Russia is ready to share its expertise with African states and other interested developing countries in the area of agricultural production and assist in implementing cutting-edge technologies. Unlike Western neo-colonialists, we're interested in building a more equitable system of resource distribution so that developing states are not forever hooked on the needle of politically conditioned humanitarian aid from the West, which is nothing other than primitive blackmail. This is so that they can overcome the challenges of the transitional period, form strong, sustainable, self-sufficient economies, which can help ensure social stability and the well-being of the population. In other words, this will give them complete freedom in exercising their sovereignty and making all domestic and foreign policy decisions. Russia is ready to help you with this in every possible way. Madam President, we note the work carried out by our American colleagues in advance of today's meeting to agree on a statement by the President of the Security Council on Hunger and Conflicts. Despite the fact that this document did not end up incorporating all the provisions we proposed, we considered it possible to support it in the spirit of compromise. The consequences of illegitimate unilateral restrictive measures and sanctions that have a direct negative impact on food security in the world have been left out of the document. It would have also been appropriate to recall paragraph 3 of Article 54 of the Additional Protocol to the Geneva Conventions of 1949, according to which the prohibitions on attacking or destroying agricultural infrastructure do not apply if such infrastructure is used as sustenance for the members of the armed forces or in direct support of military action. During today's debate, the representative of Venezuela will speak on behalf of the group of friends of the UN Charter. We associate ourselves with this statement, which reflects in a much fuller way the approach to solving problems that are a focus of our meeting today. Madam President, in conclusion, I wish to say that because the importance of Russian food and fertilizers is so great for the socioeconomic development and food security of the countries of Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, the choice now lies with you and your allies. Until the illegitimate obstacles artificially created by the West affecting Russian economic operators' ability to supply agricultural products are eliminated, it will hardly be possible to restore the normal functioning of supply chains and address other global food security issues. No matter how much you may try to shift the blame to Russia, the facts are not in your favor. So you must therefore decide what is more important for the U.S. and its allies, geopolitical considerations or the desire to help the developing world. If it's the former, then there is no need to mislead anyone, including by initiating debates like today's and drawing up beautiful joint documents. What we need is not words, but actions. We have been and remain ready to participate in joint efforts to strengthen international food security. Are you? We have serious doubts about that. Thank you.